Hello and welcome to this edition of Side Retired, the MLB podcast. It is Dylan, and today a very special guest slash former co-host slash current co-host again slash I'm not really sure what to call this whole thing. Welcome back to the podcast, Henry Kalani.
It's great to be back. I mean, obviously junior year's been an absolute madhouse, but I'm very excited to be back and doing more baseball content.
And in case you are not aware yet, Henry has been writing weekly NCAA baseball articles for the Side Retired website. So make sure to go check those out. And Henry will definitely start to appear more and more frequently on this podcast again as we get into the NCAA season. He's going to be our little expert on that as we continue to roll through things. And I'm sure you'll hear Henry throughout the rest of the podcast in different one way or another, probably more frequently than Ryan Barry, who is making an appearance again. If you go check out the website, he did a mock draft for the NCAA. So go check that out. He did draft picks 1 through 15. I'm sure Henry will eventually do the same thing at some point. So we'll see which one of them ends up being a better predictor. But for now, we are here to talk about Henry's top 10 teams heading into the 2022 spring season. Go check out his 25 through 11 on the website. So Henry, before you sort of give away your rankings, what did you think, or sort of how did you create these rankings and what made you decide who goes where? How did you make your 25 in that whole situation?
So really what I took into account was obviously you have to take into account the performance of a team last year. But then again, with the way college works, obviously with kids graduating, with the transfer portal and things like that, it makes it a lot harder for teams to keep the exact same roster going in year by year. So I think obviously if you see a team do very well in a certain year or make a very large playoff run, you sort of have to take it with a grain of salt, considering, oh, if this team was very packed with seniors, then you're not exactly sure how they're gonna exactly balance out. However, there were teams that I saw who performed exceptionally well, and they were packed with underclassmen. So you have to sort of keep that in the back of your head when thinking, okay, so they're going to be able to have more longevity going into this season. They'll be more experienced with high pressure situations, and they'll be able to carry that experience that they got last year over into the future years and especially this year.
Sounds good. So we're not going to spoil your whole 25 through 11. We're going to make people actually go to the website and read those. But how about you give us one or two teams that really stuck out to you? Maybe they could have cracked your top 10, or maybe you're expecting big things out of them that other people might not expect. So give us two sneaky teams from your 11 to 25 that you want to highlight first.
So I ranked this team fairly low just because they have a lot to prove. However, I'm expecting very big things out of Nebraska this season. Obviously, they made it to the Fayetteville Regionals last year, but a Charlie Welch home run for Arkansas ended up taking them out of the running. However, in that run that they were able to make, they showed a lot of people that they could play, and they could play with the big SEC teams. Coming into the season, they're the only Big Ten team ranked in the top 25 by Baseball America, which does say a lot. And with a final ranking of 20 last year in the top 25, Nebraska set the building blocks for a much more competitive run. I think one player that people should really watch out for is Max Anderson, because last year he had a 332 batting average, 886 OPS. And I think overall, not only will he be able to build off of that, but becoming more of a senior leader within the infield, he'll be able to have a much more commanding presence on the defensive side. And I would like to say one more would definitely be number 14 ranked Tennessee. As we sort of got into the top 15, I would say it becomes a lot trickier to decide where I wanted to place these guys. But Tennessee, as I say in the article, had arguably the best moment of the 2021 college baseball season with a walk-off grand slam hit by Drew Gilbert that put the Volunteers over Wright State in the Knoxville regional round. And with this, along with an extremely strong SEC run, they really lit the entire conference on fire, got the entire campus really getting excited for them, because Tennessee hasn't always been really considered a baseball school. However, this team last year, which is carrying over a lot of young, very exciting players, is going to have a very, very strong run. Obviously, the SEC makes it so it's a little bit harder to predict because you have so many great teams. However, I think that the pitching staff for Tennessee is solid enough. And as we saw last year, their bats are really going to be able to play against the top pitchers in the SEC.
And so obviously, big question in everyone's mind, who's your number one team? And when you think about college baseball, Normally you think of Vanderbilt, and yes, you have them as your number 2. So give us your number 1 before we get into the sort of prestigious Vanderbilt baseball.
So yeah, I had Texas as number 1, and if you look across all the rankings, most people had Texas. Overall, they had an extremely strong run last year, making it to the semifinals of the College World Series playoffs, eventually losing in a walk-off to Mississippi State. However, a lot of the things that made them great are still there. Tristan Stevens, who had an incredible game against Mississippi State in that game where they eventually lost. He threw, I believe it was 6 strong innings of 3-run ball. His slider was working, and that's what we saw really all season from him. He had great command of that slider and being able to drop a changeup in there every once in a while, along with a fastball that worked at roughly mid to low 90s. That mix of absolutely filthy stuff really allowed him to become the ace of that lineup. And with him sticking around, I think that he can only get better from here. I think Trey Faltine was a really interesting infielder that they looked at. He's now a sophomore, and he was able to crack the starting lineup of a really good team in the Big 12 in his freshman year, but has the potential to really lead the offense now. I would say that it's fair to say that Texas is the easy favorite in the Big 12. I don't think that they'll really have any trouble with an in-conference schedule, although there might be a few hiccups here and there. Overall, I think they're going to have a pretty dominant run going into the playoffs.
Sounds good. And you did have the defending champs, Mississippi State, at number 3. Is a repeat possible, or is this going to look like it's going to be Vanderbilt or Texas taking a spot?
So the reason I put Mississippi State at 3, and being an Ole Miss fan, it did hurt to say this, but I would say that Mississippi State definitely can make a run. I think it's more than possible. However, the big thing that they are going to have to get over is the loss of Rowdy Jordan and Tanner Allen. Those 2 guys were the absolute heart and soul of that team. Starkville fell in love with them. And over that entire run, over their entire careers at Mississippi State, they became absolute centerpieces of what that program was built around. They embodied the hustle, they embodied the speed, and just the grit that Mississippi State tried to play with. However, even with those 2 guys leaving, I think that's important to take a look at Logan Tanner and Landon Sims. Logan Tanner was a catcher who was really able to command games in a tough SEC schedule all of last year. And Landon Sims was absolutely huge when it came to coming out of the bullpen, especially in the College World Series. He had an absolutely outstanding relief outing versus Texas in their second College World Series matchup that Mississippi State ended up winning. And it's more than likely that he's going to be able to pile on with an even better season this year.
All right, and then tell us about your boys, Ole Miss, who you had at number 5.
So Ole Miss is kind of a complicated team to look at when you think, okay, so they lost their 2 best pitchers to the draft in Doug Nikhazy and Gunnar Hoagland. Well, Gunnar got drafted to the Blue Jays and Doug Nikhazy got drafted to the Indians. However, with this, I think that it allows a bunch of young pitchers to really make their mark in their sophomore or freshman seasons. And one that I'm very excited to watch is Derek Diamond. He has already been announced by Coach Mike Bianco to be their opening day starter. And it's more than likely that he's going to be their Friday night starter for the majority of at least non-conference play or going into SEC play. He has had above average velo. He's been sitting mid to high 90s. And I think that a development of more of his breaking stuff will make him even more deadly as they move on into the season. And I think Jacob Gonzalez, who was arguably the best freshman in the nation last year, he's their starting shortstop, hits from the left side and has shown absolutely insane power, is going to be a real centerpiece, probably hitting in the 2 or 3 spot for this team, is going to sort of evolve into a captain that we saw with somebody like Anthony Servideo, with like Tyler Keenan, who have obviously graduated now, but were such offensive powerhouses for Ole Miss in the past 5 years that I think that it's more than likely that we see Jacob Gonzalez take over that role. However, before that, Tim Elko has one final season with the Rebels. He went through the entire playoff run last year on one ACL. He blew it out in the middle of the season, then decided he wasn't going to get surgery. He was going to play on it, and ended up hitting 2 home runs in a game against Southern Mississippi, which was absolutely incredible to watch. And I think that this type of team who we've seen become very close with each other has shown that Ole Miss can most definitely run with any SEC team, like a Vanderbilt, like a Mississippi State.
really thought we were going to do it this episode, where we were going to break the streak of, since they were renamed the Guardians, every episode we have had a slip up and called them the Indians. I really thought this
Well, to
episode
be
on
fair,
draft specials.
he did get drafted by the Indians. He had
That is
not been
true.
drafted by the Guardians yet.
So technically, I don't think it counts. We'll see.
No, it doesn't.
We've been on a streak of, I think we've done 3 to 4 episodes, and every single time Indians have come up. But all right, we'll see about it. Number 6 on your list was Virginia, obviously a big powerhouse. What are your thoughts on them?
So Virginia is kind of tricky. They obviously making it to the College World Series is no slouch of achievement. They lost to Texas, but there are really only a few teams that are a few players that I would say that you should probably watch going into the season. One of them would be Kyle Teal, because he hit an absolutely whopping 335 last year for his batting average. And then Nate Savino, who is a junior right-handed pitcher who had a 3.79 ERA last year. And as Virginia is one of the top ACC teams, I think they'll be super exciting to watch. However, it will be interesting seeing their first series against Notre Dame, with those two being absolute powerhouses. That will obviously, them squaring off will show who has the better pitching rotation.
And you just segued us perfectly into talking about Notre Dame. And I think Matt Potter, our writer, would be pretty upset if we didn't mention them. You have them at number 4. So talk to us about the decision to put them all the way up that high.
Yeah. So Notre Dame took some people by surprise last year with how well they actually played. But this year, I think that everybody's expecting very big things out of them. They've lost to Mississippi State in the Super Regionals last year. But even with some graduating seniors, they have an extremely tight young core, including Roman Kimball, who is a freshman this year, who's the 13th overall ranked pitcher in the country as he graduated from high school, and has shown mid to high 90s velo with an absolutely insane curveball. And I would say that Ryan Cole absolutely raked last year, hitting for contact extremely well, showing the ability to hit to all fields with a 336 batting average. And right now, I would say that they're probably the best ACC team in the pool and probably the favorites to take the ACC.
Sounds good. And let's go all the way out west. Your number 8 team is Stanford, obviously a college that everyone knows for academics, but you're putting them up there with the baseball as well.
Absolutely. So Stanford last season lost to Vanderbilt on an absolutely heartbreaking wild pitch in the College World Series in their elimination game. They blew a lead that they had held for most of the game. And I think that that's honestly, that one moment of seeing that curveball fly over the catcher's head is going to stick into a lot of these guys' minds, because many of the guys in their starting lineup are very young. They're freshmen, they're sophomores. And so they're going to carry that moment with them for the rest of their college careers. And I think that's going to put a pretty large chip on their shoulder going into this season, showing that, okay, we had the ability to make it here, yet we choked on the biggest stage. So what does that mean for us making it back and trying to find even more success? And I think two people that should definitely be watched right now are Eddie Park and Brock Jones. Brock Jones is a junior who last year was easily the Cardinals' most productive player at the plate, and very similar to how I described Arizona in my 25 through 11 rankings. I would say that they're not really focused on the West Coast stereotype of small ball, of bunting, of pushing guys over, of aggressive base running. Rather, they're just going to try and hit the ball all over the park, try and hit a few balls out, and make you pay with any high fastballs that you leave too low.
All right. And then tell us the difference you have at number 9, Florida, and number 10, Florida State. Let's not get those two confused, and tell us the difference between the two.
Yeah. So I would say that this is an absolutely fascinating two teams, simply because Florida is coming in having sort of underperformed last year. They didn't make it as far as some people would have expected them to. And so the biggest returning player is the probable Friday night starter in Hunter Barco, who had a straight 4 ERA and had very promising control mixed with high velo. However, with this, the bats are going to need to be more consistent than they were last year, because the offense definitely showed flashes of being a dominant SEC team and being able to catch up with any pitcher. But then when you look at their series against a team like Arkansas, they were absolutely shut down. And that can't really happen when you're in a tight divisional race in the SEC. So it's really about trying to iron out consistency within the offense this year, maybe fixing the approach of a few guys and making sure that they can stay consistent throughout a very long and very grueling SEC schedule that will be crucial for them. And Florida State lost to Ole Miss in the regionals last year, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be going anywhere. Logan Lacey, who's now a redshirt senior, he hit 379 last year with a 1,058 OPS, hit absolutely incredibly. And the team is bringing back a bunch of their biggest offensive pieces, and they showed definitely that they could hit last year. But with a pretty young pitching rotation, it is going to be interesting to see how they fare in conference play, playing against some of these more senior teams.
Sounds good. And then we have gone almost 20 minutes without really talking about Vanderbilt. And I feel like if there's anyone from Vanderbilt talking and listening to this podcast, they're going to be upset with us that we didn't talk about Vanderbilt baseball in a college baseball podcast. So take it away about the Vandy boys.
Yeah, so Vanderbilt is very, very interesting case here because obviously they lost their 1-2 punch in the pitching rotation between Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker, who both got drafted last year. Obviously, there was the whole blow up with Kumar Rocker and the Mets. However, that does not mean that Vanderbilt's not going to be as good, if not better, than they were last year, because you can always rely on strong recruiting classes that Vanderbilt's going to pull in. I know that many people are even excited for next year's recruiting class that Vanderbilt's pulling in, including the likes of Drew Jones and Max Clark, who will be coming in and will obviously be expected to make an impact. However, this year, I think that there are two people that should be really focused on. Both of them are sophomores. One of them is Enrique Bradfield. And what he has been able to do in his freshman season was absolutely incredible. He's known for his speed, he's known for his fielding, and he's known for his ability to make contact in almost any situation. And that made him one of the most exciting freshmen in all of the SEC and all of the country last year. And there's no reason to think that he won't be able to carry that over now, leading the Vanderbilt offense. And he was the leadoff guy last year. I think it's safe to say that he'll be the leadoff guy this year. And his ability to get on base and manufacture a run is absolutely crucial when you're in a very tight, low-scoring game like the SEC always seems to produce. Now, a pitcher that I want to focus on for Vanderbilt is definitely Christian Little, who showed flashes of absolutely incredible pitching. And there's one specific inning that I want to point out. So in the first inning of the game against Stanford in the College World Series, that even though Vanderbilt won, there were multiple errors within the first inning that really let Little down. And you could see that he was frustrated going back into the dugout, yet he comes out in the second inning, showed incredible maturity and got a 1-2-3 and was able to get out of it. And I think that considering he was only 17 when that game happened, it shows that not only is he very mature for being that young, but he's going to be able to just improve upon his like raw and natural talent that he seems to have.
Sounds good. And then the last team we have in your top 10 is your number 7, Arkansas. I mean, not a college most people think about, but obviously you think pretty high about them.
Yeah. So Arkansas last year was ranked number 1 in the country for most of the season. However, a loss in the Super Regionals to NC State and probably was considered the biggest upset of probably the entire College World Series playoffs was definitely a disappointment for the fans in Fayetteville, especially for that to be at home. However, I think probably the most crucial person that you need to watch for this Razorbacks team is junior Peyton Pallett, who will definitely have to step up after the loss of their aces, of the Razorback aces, Kevin Cobbs and Patrick Wicklander. Peyton Pallett had a pretty good year last year. He had I believe it was a 4.07 ERA. And while that is definitely good considering normally inflated numbers that you see in college baseball, obviously with aluminum bats, making balls fly out of the park much easier, I think it definitely makes it so he will have to step up, fill a role that was previously filled by two very senior members of the Arkansas team, and it puts more pressure on him, but I think that he has the tools to be able to live up to that. And I think just one more person that should be focused on is junior infielder Robert Moore, who he hit 16 home runs last year, and he is definitely known as a power threat within the SEC. I think that it's more than safe to say that he's going to add on to that number. I'd predict roughly around 19 home runs from him this year. And I don't see a reason why he wouldn't be able to tack on a few really big clutch ones against a Tennessee or against Vanderbilt.
Sounds good. And with the MLB still in a lockdown and college baseball starting on Friday, that is definitely a nice way for you to sort of get some baseball in. It'll probably be on ESPN2 a couple of games over the weekend. So make sure to check that out. I will say before we go, since you can see the hat I'm wearing, since you can see where I'm located, since you can see all that, for those who don't know, somehow at this point, I am indeed in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown. The Big East 2022 last year obviously was dominated by UConn and Creighton. Seton Hall is always a solid team. Georgetown was at the bottom, but don't worry, we are building something fun and good here. It's the first full year that the new coaching staff is here, so we can't reveal everything that's happening here at Georgetown Baseball. Just know we're hoping for big things this year, but overall, since we do have a lot of New York City and a lot of Washington, D.C. listeners, thoughts on the Big East baseball for this year?
So the Big East, as you said, was sort of dominated by UConn and Creighton last year. However, Georgetown has a kind of a unique opportunity here to sort of ambush some teams. While UConn and Creighton are sort of sitting pretty at the top, I would definitely say that it's no slouch of a conference, even though it's not really considered to be an absolute powerhouse of the baseball conference. I think that all in all, if you put together a strong enough in-conference play, in really any conference in baseball, you're going to be able to make a splash and possibly make the postseason, whether that means going down south to an SEC team for regionals, or even if you truly do play well enough hosting your own. I think that the Big East is really up for grabs, and I don't think many people are really acknowledging that.
Sounds good. And then if you are indeed watching on the YouTube, you will now see on your screen where you can check out our articles, such as Henry's top 25 baseball teams or college baseball teams. I'm pretty sure we will probably have 10 through 1 out in an article probably before Friday opening day. Obviously, if you're listening to the podcast, you now know all about his top 10. And then, of course, we have our non-college baseball. We have Theo Epstein, we have Cubs, Dodgers, Brewers. There's stuff there for everybody. There's also our interviews, if you haven't checked out, with Ken Davidoff, Jared Diamond, Mike Vaccaro, and a couple others. Henry, welcome back to Side Retired. I know you've been writing for us, but welcome back to the podcast side, and I'm definitely sure that we will be hearing your voice more often, but
absolutely,
hopefully not junior year workload. I know it's been a struggle this first half of junior year for you.
Getting it under control now. I'm excited to be back.
Don't worry, final season's going to hit really soon. It's going to be horrible, but that means we then have summer. So
exactly.
Yes, I know Super Bowl happened yesterday and we're already looking at summer, but we will see what happens. So for Dylan, for Henry, we will be getting back to the regular top 10 center fielders probably later this week. Go check out the YouTube as well. We're going to have a nice new series of videos coming out soon that'll be wishing some players happy birthday. So who knows if one of your favorite players ended up getting a shout out video. So we have 2 interesting players coming out technically today when you're listening to this. So make sure to go check that out. The Twitter, the Instagram, the YouTube, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast. I'm just running through things. I've gotten better. I used to actually say Side Retired Pod after every single one, but a couple times doing that, I would no longer have to do that. So I think we're all good. Henry, there's no more Cocoa Crisp, unfortunately, which means that we're going to have to get you're going to have to come up with a new player for us.
Yeah, find our new staple of the Side Retired franchise.
So we will get you that soon. When the Hall of Fame ballot comes out again. But Henry, I'll let you, since you're back, say the phrase at the end of the episode. What an honor that I used to hold incredible. So precious. So,
and with that, the side is retired.
Let's go.